very full webinar, and let's see, 45 people so far on. I think there were 90 people signed up. So we'll see, we may have people enter. So my name is Kevin Czajkowski. I'm a professor at the University of Toledo in the Department of Geography and Planning. And I lead up a group called Globe Mission Earth, and many of the people talking today are from that project, but there's others who are not. I'll just share my screen and get started a little bit. Let's see if it works. All right. And this is always a dangerous part, is to do it in PowerPoint mode. See if it crashes my computer. Well, hello. Maybe it didn't. So yeah, okay. Well, anyway, we're talking about phenological gardens today, and life cycles in your classroom, in your neighborhood. And our speakers, I was going to talk a little bit about green up and green down, and it may be very, very little. And then Markus Eugster from Switzerland is going to talk about his phenological garden at his school and how his students have worked with it. Then Kathleen Johnson and Peter Garrick from Boston University are going to talk about what they've done with Providence, Rhode Island schools. Christine Stashik, she's at NASA Plumbrook, which is a NASA station in Ohio, is going to talk about what she does with the NASA Plumbrook. And then Sarah will finish up with native plants in Ohio. Let's see if I can. Okay, so I did want to mention how green up and green down does connect to the phenological gardens, but there's also many other GLOBE protocols linked to phenology. And basically phenology is the change in plants over the seasons. We have the lilac gardens, phenological gardens. There's a green up and green down. And of course, Budburst is another one. So the beginning of the plants. The protocols are all laid out. You have e-training for each one of these. And like I said, I'm not going to go into much depth, but in green up, you start out with your buds and they start to swell. And what GLOBE wants you to do is when those bud bursts and the first leaves come out, that you note that. And you have to figure out the species of the tree, for instance, if you're using trees. Let me stop sharing. So in our yard, we have different plants on different phenological cycles. So this one, the bud burst the other day here. So very tiny leaves. And this is some kind of a magnolia tree or something like that. And of course, then I have this big branch of a silver maple, and the leaves are green, getting bigger and bigger. Now, when you do green up, you actually measure the size, how big the leaf is. You use your ruler, measure the leaf size, and you try to find the same leaves, each time you visit the tree. And it might be a couple times a week you can visit the tree. And I'm not going to go into depth, I guess, and then green down, you look at the colors, and the kids look at the colors. Kids love to do this stuff, get outside, look at the trees, and to learn about how green up and green down occur. All right, so let's get into our speakers for today. So Markus, are you ready to talk? Okay, Markus.
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great. So I'll turn it over to you.
Can you see the picture?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, so I will tell you something about our phenological garden and also about other observations we use at school. So in GLOBE, the phenological garden has exactly 8 plants, and they were chosen because they were selected because each plant blooms at a different time in the year. I show you which plants are in the garden. These 8 plants. So it is a witch hazel, snowdrops, a forsythia, lilac, a mock orange, 2 kind of heather, and another witch hazel. I show you some pictures I took in our garden later. At first, what globe says what we should observe. We should observe the beginning of the flowering, the general flowering and the end of flowering of these plants, and the lilac and forsythia. We should also observe the beginning of leaf unfolding and when the leaves have fully grown. We, or me with my students, we observe just normal green up and green down with the plants in the phenological garden, because we have more trees around the school we use. So I show you shortly the plants that are used. This is Hamamelis, witch hazel, and in fact sometimes it's blooming in winter. So this picture on the right, it has snow on the flowers. Then the snowdrops, I think you know them. The forsythia also, a certain kind of lilac, a mock orange, a Philadelphus. They smell very, very sweet. And then 2 kind of heather, a red one and a white one, and another Hamamelis that is blooming in autumn. For me, it was a bit difficult to get the plants. I had to order them in Germany. There was a tree nursery that had exactly these 8 plants. So this was our first phenological garden in 2006, but we planted it 1 year ago. So I was allowed to use a little bit of the meadow here, and I was allowed to put the 8 plants here into the green. When you get the plants, they are probably cut and quite small. So these are, for example, this is the mock orange in the first year in 2005. And then next spring, it looked like this. And in summer, like this. And perhaps you have a look at the school building behind, because later they changed this area here. This was 6 years later, no, 4 years later about, and you can see how they have been growing, but it would have still worked with this place. But then they had to renovate the school building, and I had to remove all my plants and put it into another spot near the school building. And this is how it looked afterwards. And I didn't know whether I could put back my plants again in this area. They did well, but this was not our ground, that was another school, and I had to move them back. And then I had the idea that I could propose them to build a better phenological garden. And my idea was to have 4 fields, 1 for spring, for summer, for autumn, and 1 for winter. And finally, they agreed to build this garden. And this is how it looked 2011. And then when it was finished like this, these were the 4 fields for the 4 seasons. And then we planted the 8 plants of the phenological garden. These plants are the ones that are in the phenological garden. But we had more space to plant other trees, or perhaps also small plants. It took 3 years until I had a class that fitted to this project, and I asked them what they wanted to plant, and they wanted to plant mainly trees or plants that have fruit you can eat. So we planted, for example, apple tree or strawberries and other plants. So this was the day in June 2014 when my students put all the plants we ordered into the phenological garden. And this is how it looked last week. So this is, again, what is it, 6 years later. I know probably I should cut some of the trees because they grow and grow and grow. But it still works and we use it. For example, here, this is the autumn field. Here is a pear tree and an apple tree, and this is the hamamelis, the autumn hamamelis. And here you can see some herbs we planted later. So lavender and other herbs you can also use in the kitchen. I have more trees around the school because I want each student to have one tree. So I have a lot of trees selected around the school. And I mark them in a map because it is important that the other people around the school know which trees they should not cut because we want to use them for many years. I didn't know exactly what Kevin was telling about green up and green down, so I'll show you shortly my students here. One student is observing budburst. So the leaf is not fully out of the bud, but perhaps 1 or 2 days later he can measure the leaf. And here you can measure how long the leaf is. So this is the normal green up measurement. I put the scale on the sheet so they never forget to have a scale with them. And this is how we tag our leaves to find exactly the 4 leaves again. We use thin sewing threads and just put them without a knot around the stem. And green down, we use the Globe plant color guide, the normal one. And I have also an own protocol. I want the students to have only 1 leaf when they go out and where they can put all the information into 1 leaf. Here you can see I compared measurements from 2010 with the measurements from my class I have right now. So we have not yet finished, but they gave me their results. And you can see, for example, this is lilac. And you can see that blue is 10 years ago. And the number below is the day of the year. So the lilac, the budburst was about on the day 113, 10 years ago. And this year it was on the 93rd day. So it was 20 days earlier. Or I took another one. This is a Katsura tree. I don't know whether you have ever seen such a tree, but here it is even more. This year it was day 81 and 10 years ago it was day 137. So such a big difference. Budburst was in May, and now in May the leaf is already grown, fully grown here. Or a plane tree. The difference is not as big, but also clear. And this is a wild cherry tree. So with all the trees, we have about 15 to 30 days difference, which is amazing. I also show you some other projects I have running with my students to support wild bees. We have flower boxes. We have constructed such flower boxes. These are from last year, and they are already blooming. So I took this picture last week. And now I have new students, and this was just 2 days ago when we filled our boxes with earth, with soil, and we used the bubble wrap to protect the wood against the moisture. So we have now 6 new boxes, and we have already put some seeds in them. And these boxes are from the last class. They are 3 and 4 years old, and you can see they have a lot of flowers here behind. And by the way, behind this is our weather station, and this is a box where we measure just precipitation. So it just fills and evaporates again. And we have 2 other projects to support wild bees. We planted aromatic herbs. That was also just 1 week ago. My students were quite busy, and they planted all these aromatic herbs here. And the last project is now that we want to have a big flower meadow near our school. And these pictures are also from last week, because we can go to school again with half classes. And they were busy. And it looks a little bit like a walkway, but here next week we will put the seeds, and then it should grow to the left and to the right with the years. Perhaps you have also heard from the European Phenology campaign, which is a cool campaign. I participate in it, and we have a lime tree we observe from the school, from the classroom window. And perhaps you have already heard from it. It is a very sophisticated idea somebody had. You take your first picture, and then for all the following pictures, the first picture is a little bit in your screen. So I'm in my classroom, and here you can see the first picture, but behind you can see the table and the chair. And now I go to the window, and I can adjust exactly the new picture to the old picture. It's not exactly now, but here it is exactly the same view. And now I take the picture, and then all the pictures are connected to a little movie. I think I can show the movie to you. I think I must share another window. This one. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. And I started with this project in 2017. I think we have more than 100 pictures meanwhile. And so we take a picture every week. So this is a lime tree here in our school. And you can see, sometimes we have snow, but that is a rare event. And it's interesting in spring when the tree gets green again, which now happens within 2 or 3 weeks. And the last picture, I don't know whether I can jump to. The last picture is from today, I think. This one from, yes, it is from today. I go back to my presentation. I just show you 2 other things you could use in your classroom. Perhaps you have heard of cameras. You can take pictures, for example, every hour or every 30 minutes, and you can connect them also to a film like the one you saw in the European Phenology campaign. And we have developed a program to analyze the colors of the pictures. So you can, for example, detect how much green it has in the pictures, and then you can make graphs with Excel, for example. So you can see my students working with this project. And we have produced boxes with the cameras we can use in Swiss schools. And perhaps if you are interested in seasonal changes, you could go to my website and go to the red one, seasonality. And there I have a project where people take pictures every month. Here you can see an example from a student from Latvia. Anna took a picture from a bridge. Every month a picture around the year. And at the end she told me she surprised her teacher with a little booklet she made with these pictures, and she sent me this picture. So Anna and her teacher, when she gave her these pictures. Okay, so that is my part, what I do with my students.
Thanks, Markus. You have a really large amount of things you're doing. That's great. Thanks for sharing. If people have questions, put them in the chat box, and then we'll address those. So I think we should move on then to Kathleen and Boston University. And we can address the questions to Markus after Kathleen is done. And if you have questions for Kathleen, you know, put them in the chat box.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. And so I'm Kathleen from the Boston University Globe Mission Earth team. And we want to, so linking into what Markus was just talking about, we want to share some of the resources that we have available and some of the things that we've been doing with teachers in Providence, Rhode Island around phenology. So for a little bit of background, Globe's plant phenology protocols were developed through collaboration with the National Phenological Network, which was a Globe partner at the time of this collaboration. From the National Phenological Network, the full definition of phenology is recurring plant and animal life cycle stages and their timing and relationships with weather, climate, and the seasons. This broader definition actually helps to provide some context for Globe within the next generation science standards. So our resources embrace some of that broader definition, and our resources do include some resources around animal phenology as well. To support phenological explorations and investigations in Providence, we have successfully planted 3 gardens at 3 different schools in Providence. One of those schools was Webster Avenue Elementary School. This is their garden in the early spring. You can just barely see some snowdrops back here that are flowering. And then this is late spring with the garden sprung up. We have also planted at Anthony Carnevale Elementary School. This is their garden in the early spring, and this is their garden in the late spring. So what we did, we didn't stick specifically to the Globe list of plants. We did select plants like Globe did that are going to be flowering at different times. So students can observe plants flowering from late February all the way into early November, and they can do some comparative phenology looking at how different species of plants have different timing of their phenological stages. So looking at our columbine here compared to, we have some coral bells over here that are not flowering. We also have Globe Readiness resources for phenological explorations, and one of the ones that we've been doing the longest is bottle biology. This is a really good phenology readiness investigation because students get to explore phenology in the classroom or in their homes by planting plants in this controlled system. So they are going to plant a seed in this set up little pot and watch it sprout, watch it flower, watch it go to seed, and they can even plant that next generation of seeds to watch that cycle again and look at potentially heredity. Some of the other experiments they can do, we've had students look at how sunlight impacts growth, and we've had a 6th grade classroom that was looking at how water quality affects plant growth, all using this bottle biology setup. Phenology bingo is a really fun readiness activity for familiarization with phenophase vocabulary and also what phenophases look like. So the cards that I have include plants that we've planted in the student gardens, so students can become familiar with what they're looking for when they're looking for these phenophases. We also have pollination bingo for common pollinators in the garden, including some things that people don't always think of, especially young students don't always think of as pollinators, like flies and wind and even ants and bats being pollinators. So students can become a little more familiar with what we're talking about when we say pollinators. California Academy of Science has an activity called Flowers Seeking Pollinators, and this is a wonderful readiness activity for looking at something like the Globe Ruby-throated Hummingbirds Project, or looking at any other pollinators. This is geared more toward grades 4 through 7, but in this activity, students become a pollinator. And they are given a pollinator profile and told you are that pollinator. By reading this profile, they look at a huge list of flower traits, this is only 2 of 10, and decide which flowers that pollinator might visit based on both the pollinator profile and the flower traits profile. Something geared toward, I would say younger students, but I have fun with it too. So students of all ages. For pollinator ready or ruby-throated hummingbird connection is juice box pollination. And I developed this to address a common misconception that pollinators visit flowers for pollen. Pollinators are usually visiting for nectar. So that misconception leads students to wonder why a hummingbird would visit a flower. This addresses that by students building a flower and you pour juice in. You can use just a little juice box, or you can use this setup. You put a straw in, the straw needs to be a little bit short, so it's gonna just barely be at the top of either cotton swabs, or you can use cotton balls. And then when the students come away, they've picked up pollen just like any pollinator would. So this does address the model of mimicking pollination in plants. Some other readiness activities we have, so linking to what Markus was talking about with Green Up, we found with younger students, Green Up is a pretty tough concept to lock into because a lot of younger students are thinking that their trees are dying in the winter. So we developed the Mystery of the Winter Twig to explore that. And with this, students are going to dissect a dormant winter twig. They're going to have a second twig that they put in water and in the window. And with that second twig, they can watch the full greening up cycle while it's still winter before they're looking for it in the spring, so they can become familiar with what they're looking for. And any twig from any leafy tree will actually green up as long as it has water and sunlight. We did the Mystery of the Winter Twig with a 2nd grade classroom and started with asking them what they know about what plants need to live. And they gave us the list: water, sunshine, room, soil, and roots. But this led them to ask us, if we're just putting the twig in water, how is it going to grow without most of these things? The dissection part of Mystery of a Winter Twig led them to changing a concept, so reforming their mental model of what's happening to trees. They did think their twigs were dead, but when they dissected their twigs, they came up with the conclusion, I think my twig is alive because it's green inside. So it was a lot of fun to do, and we've done it with 2nd grade through 5th grade. Shifting to GLOBE activities and some resources we've developed to support GLOBE activities, so some supplementary resources. When we're looking at the phenology protocols, we have resources that are also linked to the National Phenological Network, who had partnered with GLOBE to create their phenology protocols. So they have the Budburst Project and Nature's Notebook Project, and we built some resources based around that. One of the resources is a plant life stages key. So the thing about Nature's Notebook and Project Budburst, even now, if you or your students are walking around your neighborhood and want to track phenophases of any plant, you can report those to either one of these projects. If you see witch hazel and forsythia and heather, those are plants that you could report to Globe. Another resource we developed for phenology is a garden insect key, because students are always curious about the insects that they're seeing on the plants. And so we have a list of very common insects that you could see in the garden for New England gardens, and gave them that list to take out with them. And then we also have some full phenophase definitions for the plants that we have included in gardens for teachers and older learners to know what they're looking for. Finally, with Globe activities, there is the Green Up, Green Down investigation, and for a broader scope, the Adopt a Tree investigation. So supplementary resources that we have for that, we actually have a project science journal that is an annual journal. Students can start in the fall, and there are pages for them to track green down with the color of either their leaves for older students, or if they're doing Adopt a Tree as younger students, tracking the color of their whole tree. There are pages for green up. There are pages for doing leaf rubbings to keep track of what their leaves actually look like. So this is a full year-long project activity that can be pulled apart into individual activities and used. And I want to pass it over to one of our teachers, Richard Tremonti, who has been doing this with his second grade classroom. He's been doing Adopt a Tree for a few years now. Here they're doing the Mystery of a Winter Twig. And so I am going to turn my speed talk over to Richard and let him talk about what he's done with his students.
So I'm gonna, so hello everyone. I have a presentation, Kathleen. Am I able to do it
Yes,
from here?
Stop sharing.
Yep.
And you go ahead and share your screen. And thank you so
Okay.
much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome very much. I'm very excited. Let me just get share my screen up here. Meeting Zoom. Where am I? Share. I'm looking for my stuff here. Hold on just for a second. Let's see where it is. I know.
Should be the green button at the bottom.
Yeah. I know. I'm just trying to find the let me try this again. Word. Let's see. Okay. There we go. All right. Okay. And I'm going to put it on the share mode. So the transition background. Okay. So actually, Kathleen, when I do this, I need to put this in the share mode, right? So, okay.
Well, we can see it.
You can see it? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as you can see it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just put this down here. Okay, so we a lot of what Kathleen talked about, we were able to do in our classroom, and Green Up, Green Down, and Anthony Cannavale. And we actually worked on based on a science inquiry about the trees in winter. All right. So I teach in an inclusion classroom with another co-teacher, and this is Anthony Cannavale. We actually decided at the beginning of the year to adopt a tree. Each group in our classroom adopted a tree. We have 3 groups. It's an inclusion classroom, so we have a mix of special education kids along with regular ed kids as peer models. So we had each of them adopt a different tree species and that are located within our schoolyard, and that they could study throughout the school year. An adoption sign was placed with the team names, and the student pictures were placed on each tree. So if we go right here, you can see the swans, and you see the bunnies, and you see the snow leopards. Those are the 3 groups. And they each had to choose a different species of trees. And Kathleen and I had conversations about what types of trees they were. And we adopted them the first week of school, which started in September. And this is just some of the pictures they chose that they wanted to use. They actually helped me with this presentation a little bit. And these were some of the noticings that they had already. They started to notice about the differences within the species of the trees. So then this all came about, stick versus twig, or in other words, dead versus dormancy. One day the leaves had fallen, it was cold, it was December, beginning of January, and this question came up: are trees dead in the winter, Mr. Tremonti? That's exactly what a couple of kids were asking me. They're in schoolyard at recess, they're dead. So that one inquiry question from the student prompted this investigation, which spanned a few months, but has actually continued. So to learn about misconceptions that our students may have had, I took an informal survey first of their thoughts about this question. All right, and here's what we came up with. So the common misconceptions about trees, first, a second grader, okay, in the wintertime were, most trees believe trees died in the winter and came alive again in spring. Just, that was it. Some thought they were just asleep. Others thought that they were frozen, they freeze, and then some had no idea at all what goes on with trees in the wintertime, right? So then what happened was, as a class, we decided that we needed an expert to help us. And I've been working with Globe and BU for 3 years now, and it's been a great experience. So we decided we wanted Globe help, and we reached out to our BU superhero, Miss Kathleen. And she swooped in to save the day, which is true, and had us knee deep in twigs to investigate in a top secret mission called Operation Winter Twig. And that's what we call it, Operation Winter Twig, which is basically the mystery of the winter twig. And this led to a huge amount of exciting activities and discoveries that the children made on their own. And that's what we want. It's inquiry based, right? Based on science standards. And you can see some of my students here, they're taking everything apart. They had what we call a Brook paper, which was actually their science journal for this period of time. You can see that they're taking apart the twigs. They're writing the information down here on their investigation. And then we continued that investigation. Kathleen and I had a conversation back and forth, and we decided to continue. She left twigs there, but we also went out and we clipped twigs from their trees. And then my teaching partner and I got a twig from a tree that we had adopted. We wanted to see what happened, right? If they're inside, based on that question, well, are they going to grow? Are there going to be any bursts? We knew they came to the conclusion, and it comes in later, that yeah, they are alive. They live outside, but what about inside? And what happens to these buds, right? So the students continued by doing the following. Each team kept twigs in a cup of water, and they were placed in front of the window with plenty of sunlight. Each of them marked their cups. And in addition, the twigs were brought with Kathleen. They had their twigs as well, like I just said, from their trees and their respective cups. We had what we call twig monitors. They were assigned to monitor water levels, record air temperature, mark any changes they noticed in the twigs. And then all the students monitored the twigs weekly and recorded their noticings and presented their noticings to the class. So here you can see right here, we have, as we were going along, we started to notice changes relatively quickly in their cups, and here they are. We would do this weekly. The monitors would keep me informed. They would write down their own information, and then I would come in and check. And once a week we would just check. And as we were going along, we'd have these discussions about what they noticed. They would measure some of what the forsythia. They were measuring the flowers, and then they started to wonder, well, what happened if the flowers fell off? What comes next? We had different types of trees. This was one of their trees that came from the back schoolyard. And again, they had magnifying glasses that Globe provided, where they could really get a close look at their twigs and their buds. And this is an example of what they would fill out. They would fill this out once a week. Unfortunately, this stuff is at school. Their stuff is at school, like in their science folders. But luckily, I was able to take pictures of what they were doing on here, and just a description of what they needed, of what they did. So we came up with some conclusions, right? We collected, but just before we left, our last day in school was March 13th. And so the evidence was about 8 weeks. And so they understood we talked about the word dormant. We worked on that word. They used that word in their vocabulary, the word dormant. They did some noticing. The air temperature in the classroom was consistently between 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The twigs were kept constantly in water, and they had plenty of sunlight during that entire time. after after all of this, 100% of the students agreed that trees and bushes were not dead or frozen during the winter based on the evidence that they collected during the collection period. And all the students had to make a claim and support it with evidence that they recorded on the data collection sheets, which are the group sheets. And then for differentiation, because we have 10 students who are special needs kids and ELL kids, those students who have an IP or ELL kids, their work was modified, and they worked with our teacher assistant, and they could draw what they saw, or our TA would scribe for them. They were assigned a peer model also, or they could simply pull a twig from a cup and talk about it. So that is basically what they did with this green up, green down, and also the whole idea of bud bursts, which led to another part of, I'm not going to present today, but at our symposium in Providence about air temperature and bud bursts, which was very interesting, that another student brought up in January, because we had a warm winter, and why were buds bursting in January and February. And this is my class, my last one right here. This is my class here, this little group, and they helped me with this a little bit and put their information in there, and so that's it.
Yeah, Kathleen, I think you're muted still.
Oh yeah.
Thanks. I said thank you, Rick. That was wonderful,
Oh.
and I love seeing the pictures of your students again, because it's been a while since.
It has been, yes. I know. So it's great to it's great to see them. I miss them. That was the last day. That picture was taken the last day, their 13th. Who
Wow.
knew we wouldn't be back?
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Should I stop? I think I stopped. Did I stop sharing? Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I think we're all.
You're all wrapped up, Kathleen?
We are all wrapped up. That is
All right, great.
what we have to share.
Wonderful. Like I said, if anybody has questions, please post them in the chat. Marcus, there was a question from Cynthia Medansky. I was wondering if you could answer it in the chat, and it's about what research questions your students worked on when taking weekly photos of the same tree. So that was the question. If you could answer that in the chat, that would be great. So our next speaker is Christine Stachik, if I say that right, from NASA Plum Brook, which is part of NASA Glen in Ohio. And I think, Janet, are you going to be the one sharing? Yeah, you're sharing the PowerPoint, and then I think Christine's on the phone. So Christine, are you here?
Christine, did you hear that? Oh, she's been on the phone all this time.
I know, yeah. I saw her phone.
Speaker. Hold on a minute. Christine? Christine?
I could unmute her and just see what happens.
Oh, is she on? Because she said she couldn't use it. She had to be on the phone and not on, she had to call my number.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Okay. Great.
Can you hear her, Kevin?
Yes, yes. Hi, Christine.
Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. My phone was acting up. Yes, so my name's Christine Stachak, and I'm from the NASA Glen Research Center here in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm here today to talk to you about our Natural Resources Program, which I'm focusing specifically on Plum Brook Station, which is located in Sandusky, Ohio. We have two centers, one in Cleveland where we're like a mini city, but Plum Brook Station is much larger than you'll see in some of my other photos later on in this presentation. But I've been running this program for about 2 years, and I've loved every moment of it. So I've been very lucky that I've gotten to manage such a cool program, and also with NASA, where they go much more above and beyond regulatory requirements. And so here, even on the first slide, are 3 activities that we manage as part of our species management program. At the top, you see a picture of garlic mustard, which is part of our invasive species management activities. In the bottom left, you see a picture of the Lee St. John's wort, which is one of our listed species that we try to help promote at Plum Brook Station. And then on the right is just a classic pollinator, and that's some of the activities that we do to try to help promote those habitat locations. So next slide, please.
Okay, it's there.
All right, so here you can see on the right is a picture of Plum Brook Station, and as you can see, it is massive. you go to Google Earth and you do the aerial photo, you'll be able to see Plum Station there. So it's 6,400 acres, and that, again, located in Sandusky, Ohio. A little bit of background is that this land was acquired by the Plum Ordnance Work during World War II, and they acquired this land to manufacture TNT and penolite. And that's part of the reason why the location is so large, is that they wanted some buffer zones. And then NASA began acquiring the land in the mid-50s. And so this land was acquired by the Plum Ordnance Work prior to the use of herbicides and pesticides. As you can see in this photo, there's a lot of farmland surrounding the outside. And because of this being before the chemicals we're starting to use being utilized on a more regular basis, we have a lot of listed and rare species at Plum Station that you don't really see in other areas of Ohio. And again, we mentioned earlier that there's a lot of buffer zones, and that's part of, and now with that being in consideration where buildings were actually located and where demos occurred, is that majority of this land is still unused habitat. So we have a lot of prairies, oak savannas, forests, wetlands. And so now I'm going to kind of dive into some of the neat species that we manage. And if you go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So here's another overview of Plum Station, but with the large color blotches that we have on this map, these are some of the areas that through species surveys that we've conducted the past few years have been identified as priority areas for management. This particular map is for plant communities. And then when you actually see the little circles across this map, those are species that have been identified as listed or species of interest. So we have 2 state endangered species, which is really neat to be able to say that we have those here on site. One is the Lee St. John's wort, which I showed a picture on the opening slide. And the second is the bayberry. We have 6 state threatened plants and 10 state potentially threatened. And so again, you can kind of see they're spread throughout most of the sites, but we do have some condensed patches that we take into consideration when we're trying to plan some of our activities. Next slide, please.
Okay. Okay, Christine, it's up.
All right, and then so again, this is the same map with an overlay. You can see some of the shaded areas that we use for a lot of our focus areas. But this one, you can see that this map's for our rare, threatened, and endangered animals. So that's where we have the little circles and triangles where it's identifying ones that are listed or ones that are of interest or concern. So I divided on the table on the side, you can see that we have 3 categories that we've been able to identify throughout our species surveys. So for reptiles and amphibians, we do have 1 state endangered, and that's the smooth green snake, which was really exciting. I got to see it one time when I was out in the field. Thankfully, it's really small, so it's not terrifying when it falls out in front of you. Then we have 2 state species of concerns. For birds, we do have 1 federal species of concern, which is the bald eagle, and we have 2 active nests on site. And on top of that, we have 11 state species of concern. So it kind of, Plum Station's a pretty big bird watching spot, especially within the employees. They get really excited. They have their binoculars for going out and about. And then on top of the birds, we also have some bats. And so we have 7 state species of concern within the bat realm. And so as you can see between this chart and the one before is that we are managing quite a range of natural resources. And this is just looking at our species, which is the plants and animals. And so not only do we have regulatory drivers, but it's kind of helping display that with this just being at Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, we have a lot of natural resources. And then with it only being 1 location, we have 13 centers and facilities across the nation. So it's really neat to see that we still, even though we're located in a small pocket of Ohio, that we have a wide range of responsibilities when we're trying to exercise our environmental stewardship. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So how do we manage these natural resources? And one way is through a species management plan that I develop on an annual basis. One of the activities outlined in this plan is management by field burning. So as you can see in the pictures on the right, the initial one is where the grass is dead, everything's decaying. That's what we use to fuel the fires. And then the second one, you actually see the field burning occurring. And then in the following picture on the bottom, that's what it would look like in the spring after we conduct one of our burns. So why do we do field burning? Well, it helps restore and preserve the fire-adapted prairies, savannas, and oak forests that we have at Plum Station. The Native Americans used to conduct these types of activities for pest management, to help with hunting, so they'd be able to burn some of the grasses to help to see the deer better. So the native plants that we have in these locations are used to that extreme heat, and they actually need that in order to germinate with their seeds. So we're conducting these field burns to help promote the native vegetation, but also we're using it to help suppress the non-native plants that we have. So where they're not used to that extreme heat, we're able to, after a couple burns annually, to start pushing back some of those species. And this is a huge management tactic for us because we're able to manage large sections at minimal cost and resources. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Another activity that we do is prairie reseeding. This is one that we tend to focus in the areas that we field burn on, as you saw on the slide before. And the really neat part about this one is that we're reseeding with the plants that we have at Plum Station. So in prairie to reseeding, we also do prairie seed collection. We'll go out, we'll collect, typically ones we collect most often would be Indian grass seeds and milkweed seeds. And so we're taking those seeds from Plum Station and we're reseeding to help try to promote those native populations, and we're increasing our pollinator habitat. The other great part about doing our prairie reseeding and prairie collection is that we use them as outreach activities. So I typically go out with students, whether it's our college interns, high school interns. I've done milkweed reseeding with a Boy Scout group. And so these are kind of trying to help promote STEM careers that are outside of just math and science. It's showing that there's environmental focused STEM career paths too. On the other side of this slide, you see garlic mustard management. So as I mentioned, we're trying to promote the native populations, and we're trying to push back a lot of those invasive species. And one that we've managed both at Lewisfield and Plum Station is garlic mustard. And we're trying to push back against these invasive species to protect our critical habitat at Plum Station, because as these species are taking over, we're starting to create monocultures, limiting diversity, and the rare plants that we have are going to start having trouble surviving in these environments. And so garlic mustard is one that we're able to focus on. And it's a lot easier, you can hand pull it. So that's a way that we've used it as an outreach activity to try to help with employees. Again, there's a huge student outreach activity that I do. And so it's kind of showing how quickly invasive species are able to take over if they're not managed, where just one plant of garlic mustard averages about 600 seeds. So this has been a really great activity and something that I've used. Even I still hear from one of our college interns. She texts me every spring of just saying that she can't walk past garlic mustard anymore without stopping to pull it. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So in pairing with invasive species management, we conduct a lot of brush removal, which is the trees and shrub. And some of these areas, this is one of our bigger concerns with our oak savannas. So as you can see in the picture on the right, is that you're able to walk through this oak savanna. And that is what we've been trying to help push back with some of these, again, invasive species that are starting to fill in and start creating those monocultures. Some other areas of brush removal and tree removals that we focus on is the tree of heaven, quaking aspen, black locust. All of these species that start taking over some of these pockets of rare plants. And so we're trying to recover Plum Station's unique prairie and savanna ecosystems. And then these, as I just highlighted, they're inhibiting the growth of the native plants. And we're trying to protect these critical habitats at Plum Station and restoring the native ecosystems. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So those were kind of about 4 or 5 activities that we try to conduct every year at Plum Station, a lot through partnerships and then NASA using our resources ourselves, and then with them being outreach activities that we do with students and even some of the workers. So outside of Glenn Research Center, we also have the NASA Natural Resources. So I just gave you a kind of a really brief overview of what we do at Plum Station, but if you're interested in learning more, here's a link for being able to go to the NASA's Natural Resources Management page, open to the public, and gives you a little background of what NASA manages, how many enlisted species do we manage, and what regulatory drivers do we have, and kind of partnerships that we try to utilize to be the best stewards of the resources that we can. And that is it for me. My next slide is just a closure.
Thanks, Christine. A great overview of what you do, which is unique, because who knew that NASA managed so much property and then, you know, worried about what species are on that property. So if you have questions for Christine, please put them in the chat box. I see Marcus was answering a question there. And then we're going to finish up with Sarah Merzwiak, and she's going to talk about.
Kevin, I would just like to say Kathleen has a 4 o'clock meeting, and it's a 4 o'clock meeting now. So
yeah, okay.
She might not be on to answer.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Kathleen. Appreciate it.
I didn't know that I did. I do?
Well, I don't know.
I'm sorry, Christine, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, Christine does. Okay.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
It's okay. I'm just like checking my calendar.
Cool, sorry about that. Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to send me an email and I can get back with responses.
Well, thanks, Christine.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was great listening to everyone, and have a great end of the meeting. Bye.
Bye. Thanks. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, hi everybody. Looks like we'll go a little over here, but that's okay, right? Because this is awesome information. So when we first started talking about doing this webinar, I got super excited about it because this is something I've been into for quite a few years now, is trying to plant native plants in my own little yard with my house. When I started doing that, I first started buying plants from big box stores, whatever was on clearance, and just trying to get anything to grow. And I didn't really look closely at what was native and what was not. And so now subsequently, I'm in the process of removing some of the things that I already planted and trying to replace them with native plants. And I also naturally ended up getting into rain gardens because I noticed that I had some downspouts that would flood my yard, and I started researching rain gardens. So I wanted to talk just very briefly about the importance of using native plants and the importance of rain gardens. So you can see in this first slide here, see the root structure of your typical Kentucky bluegrass, right? Look how short and tiny that is compared to the long, well-developed root systems of more native species. And you can see just from this diagram how native plants will help to retain and control rainwater. Okay, so here's another diagram here. So here's some of the other, okay, so daylilies right now, I actually have a huge patch of daylilies that I posted on Facebook, free for anyone to come dig them up. I've already had some people to come dig them up. So I'm getting rid of those and then replacing them with some of these other things. I do have some black-eyed Susan, some common ninebark. So why are native plants important? They're more suited to your local habitat and climate. They require much less maintenance. They should hypothetically require little to no watering, no pesticides or herbicides. They're often drought and flood resistant, and they attract those pollinators such as bees and butterflies that both Christine and Kathleen were talking about. They also provide an important food source for birds and insects. So native plant societies, or the North American Native Plant Society here, has a listing of places where you can go to find, hold on. Here we go. To find locally sourced natives in your area. And there's also a couple other sources I wanted to talk about. So here's what I was talking about with buying things right from the box, the big box stores. You need to know that they're not regulated to sell natives. They sell all kinds of plants. They sell whatever's going to make them some money, right? And they may also source their plants from growers who have used pesticides on them. So even if you are buying native plants from the big box stores, they may be coated with pesticides and still kill those monarchs and anything else. And that's what happened here in this group that I'm part of on Facebook, which I highly suggest that if you guys are interested in this, join some. There's like an endless variety of native plant groups on Facebook, and I've learned so much from them. This one's called The Beautiful Monarch. And this lady bought some milkweed from Home Depot, and she was raising some monarch caterpillars indoors, and it killed them all. So this is a really important link for you. So the first place I would suggest that you look for local plants for yourself in the United States is your local conservation district. In our area, it's called the Soil and Water Conservation District. It may be by different names, but if you follow this link, you'll find a listing for your area, and they can help you find native plants. There's also something called Wild Ones. So wildones.org has locations around the US. You can search by your state or your nearest state here for the different chapters, and they'll help you find locally sourced plants, organic native plants. So here's a listing here for Ohio. If you don't see one for in your area, you can also start a new chapter, which is pretty cool. So that's something maybe you could do with students or other teachers. So just very briefly about rain gardens. So rain gardens are constructed to handle excess water runoff. And you can see here's a couple different examples built along roads. So basically rain gardens can turn what previously looks like this, a little standing pond, into this beautiful planted area that attracts pollinators. And I actually constructed one of these, like I said, on my property. And I used the excess water from the downspout. So what I did is I dug down about 2 feet. I filled it with riprap down here, then soil. And actually have on the next slide here. So I live in Toledo, right on the shore of Lake Erie. Here's my little yard. And hopefully this video works. You can see, I thought what better way to show the rain garden than on a rainy day. So that's my very small yard. And I have a couple rain barrels there, also catching the water. And you can see once the rain barrels fill up, it drains into the rain garden there. So that's full of milkweed. None of that is, none of the milkweed is coming up yet. It's just barely starting. So, but once it blooms, then I have monarchs stopping by. And it's pretty awesome. So I wanted to talk really quickly about 2 of our teachers, and I'm going to end by handing it off to one of the teachers. So Cindy Medansky, she's actually on the call. Her school is McKinley STEM Academy. It's located here in Toledo, and here's their school grounds. And you can see here, when the school was constructed, it's a new build. They put in this parking lot rainwater, stormwater drainage garden. And she has this on her property. The students do go out there and check surface temperature and utilize that area. This is a photo of some of the students actually checking tree height with the Globe Observer app in that area. So hopefully Cindy can keep working with students in that area. And then finally, Laura Kubiak is, oh, I didn't change the name of the school, I'm sorry. It's the Toledo Natural Science Technology Center. And that's located here. And this is her grounds. And you can see actually in this aerial view, she's lucky enough to have this huge, huge green field and a stream crossing the property. So, and what she does is actually have her students grow and sell native plants. So I wanted to allow her a chance to just quickly tell us about that. You all set, Laura? raingardeninitiative.org. Unmute her. Janet, can you
okay, I think I got it. Sorry.
Okay.
Technical difficulties. I think I'm burnt out on online teaching and just drew a blank on how to do stuff. Okay, so thank you, Sarah. So I'm Laura Kubiak. I work for Toledo Public Schools, like Sarah said, at the Aerospace and Natural Science Academy. And this is a topic that I could speak extensively to because we spend so much time on it, but I'll just, for the sake of time, since it's 4:10, tell you a little bit. Like Sarah mentioned, we do have a plant sale, and it takes us the entire school year to prepare for that. And that seems very fitting for the topic of this webinar today. So I just typed up like really quick timeline. When the students come back to school in the fall, hopefully we'll be doing that. The first thing that they do is they learn how to maintain our native plant gardens. So we do have 4 of them on our school's property. We're very lucky with 10 acres, and then the Toledo Botanical Gardens is next to us with another 23 acres. So right when they come back to school, they learn what they need to do to prepare the garden for fall and winter. A lot of that is weeding. And then as the gardens start to dry out in the fall, they harvest seeds. There's a picture of one of my students, Olivia is her name. She's working with a group of students to clean milkweed pods. And they do that for a couple dozen different species of plants that are natives planted throughout our property. And then in December, we actually cold stratify those seeds by putting them in our school's shade house. And so we trick the seeds into thinking that they're going into winter. And then very early, we bring them into the greenhouse in February to warm them up and trick them into thinking it's springtime, so that by the time May comes around, we can have a decent sized plant to sell. So we have our plant sale is Mother's Day weekend. That's been happening since the mid 70s, but of course this year it was unfortunately canceled. You can see the flyer to the right. That's a flyer from last year's plant sale. It's a huge event. We actually make several $1,000s from it. That goes right back into our school's career tech materials and activities and field trips and even a camping trip. It goes to help maintain our school's animals. We have a couple hundred of them. It's pretty awesome. So, and then it's also linked to the kids' business class. So they learn all about what it takes to fundraise and how to set the prices and how to order supplies, and for students that leave soil out on the tables, what the actual cost to wasting supplies means. So it's a very extensive experience for the kids, and it really crosses all content areas. This is just a quick image. So in the last August, when the kids came back to school, it was pretty invaded with some weeds, and the kids worked as a team to clean it up. So you can see the before and after, and it's definitely a lot of work, but they're very, very proud of what they do. And let's see, I knew I was missing a slide. Okay, so we have 4 gardens, like I think I said in the beginning. And what I wanted to note was, Sarah mentioned wild ones. If you were going to start a native garden at your school, I would highly recommend partnering with a community organization. So Wild Ones is a fantastic one. Our school actually won 2 grants from Wild Ones to help us get started. And Sarah also mentioned county soil and water districts. So ours, Lucas County, I think I saw Jamie on the call. They actually helped us plan one of our gardens, which turned out to be a rain garden. So this is definitely not something that I do by myself. In addition to several students helping with this, our community is involved, and it sets a good example for families that walk through our school property. And then Wild Toledo and the Toledo Zoo helped us install a native garden along our creek. And like Sarah showed those pictures of plants with 15-foot roots that will help improve our water quality. So that's something that our kids have studied with the hydrology globe protocols. And then finally, we share a native garden that overflows from the high school property onto the elementary property. So there are a lot of learning opportunities. I honestly haven't gotten into the phenology protocols with our native plants, but now that's something that I would like to look into. But it's exciting to think about how you can make observations of the natural world year round and have our students involved with this. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that with our plant sale, the students are really proud that the plants are the native plants are all regionally sourced, so they get to learn to be more connected to their local environment. And then not only are we excited about the native plants that are on our property, I think it's inspiring to think that the thousands of native plants that we sell at our plant sale, those were all from seeds that were collected on our own school property. And so Sarah talking about all of the benefits of native plants, the students contribute to that and they've become attached to that. And then it's their families that end up coming to the plant sale, not only to volunteer at it, but then also they end up planting native gardens in their own families' backyards, as well as veggie gardens. So it starts in the classroom and goes to their home and makes our community a better place. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. I actually bought native plants for my own yard from Laura's plant sale last year, just so everybody knows.
So did I. All right.
Yes, thank you for your support of our plant sale, Kevin and Sarah, and we'll have you come back next year because we'll have it next year. Oh, wait, I did have one more thing. So because our plant sale was canceled, we ended up donating a lot of the native plants to community gardens and to area greenhouses, kind of as a give back to the community, help boost the local economy. So it's not wasted effort by the students, and the students know that. So that was important to note.
Nice.
Well, great. All right. And Sarah, you're all set?
All set.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to thank everyone for calling in today. Wonderful webinar. You know, the plant phenological gardens, green up, green down. These are all great globe activities for kids to do. Here's our different Globe Mission Earth web pages. As Janet said in the chat, we will host or post the recording on YouTube, and then she'll put the PowerPoint links in the description. All right, so I wanted to thank everyone for coming and have a great rest of your week.